Good morning, 7 East. That's right, it's episode 007 on Free LEPRE Radio with appropriate extra intro music to set the mood, even though we're doing nothing related to secret agents today. Alright, that's enough. So today is kind of a cleanup episode. I have a bunch of questions that you asked me from the 23rd and 24th that I will be answering on this Thursday show. So let's get right to the questions. Audience Q&A. Okay, so these are from these days. If you asked a question on these days, I'm answering it now. Alright, so first question. What's the deal with the toilet paper lately? Alright, interesting. Affecting all of us, I'm sure, or some of us. Well, short answer, people panic and panic buy. It makes no sense. In theory, you should not be going to the bathroom any more during a pandemic than during normal times. In fact, probably less, since many people are eating less with restaurants closed. The perceived shortages will go away. People just buy it as needed, not based on fear of not having it months from now. And if you're already out, napkins can be a good substitute. Not that I would know. Question number 2. Have you ever watched White Collar? If you haven't, you should watch it. It's on Hulu. I have not seen the show, but I do know of it. I recognize the name. And I think I might actually check it out since I need more things to watch under this quarantine, and I'm sure many of you do also. Both of these questions coming from Linda, period 5, questions 1 and 2. Question 3, this is from Angel, I believe. Are you ever going to do a live Free LEPRE Radio? Yes! I'd like to do this over a Google Meet. I'm planning to host one this Friday at 1:15 p.m., 1:15 or 1:30 or so. Stay tuned for a formal announcement and link, which will appear on Friday. Spread the word, hope you can be there. Are we still going to have the Unit 5 test? This is from Amanda, I believe, in period 6. It all depends on when we return to school in person. Do not worry about it, though. I know learning this way is difficult. I'll make sure any test or quiz we might do when we come back is fair and that you have more than enough time and resource to prepare for it. So I wouldn't worry about that right now. I will make sure that all of you are in a position to do well on it. I know it's difficult learning this way. Hard to ask questions. It's just hard to communicate. But don't worry about that. We'll figure that out when we get back. Content-related question. This is from Jack, period 1. What if the person who committed the crime leaves for Jamaica or any random country? Do they get away with the crime or do they get sent back? That is a very good question, referencing how if someone commits a crime in a certain state and runs away to another state, they have to be returned. Well, countries have things called extradition, where if someone commits a crime and runs away to a different country, the country they run to allows them usually to be extradited or sent back to where they committed the crime to face trial. So for example, let's say somebody committed a murder in the United States, and then before they were caught, they were hopped on an airplane and they flew to Australia. The U.S. authorities could get on the phone with people in Australia and say, we want this person back in the United States. We suspect them of committing murder. We want them to stand trial here. Australia usually will say yes, assuming there's nothing fishy about the case, and they will capture the person and send them back to the United States to face trial. That is extradition. It gets complicated if, for example, something is not against the law in America or not against the law in another country, and you have to kind of disagree on whether someone should be punished or not. But usually on basic crimes that everyone can agree on, the suspect will be sent back to that country. And yes, Jack asked for a shout out. So happy birthday to Jack's sister. That was supposed to be on March 23rd. Happy birthday with this fake cake. Federalism cake, we can call it. Alright, going back to our objective, second thing on our agenda, we're going to go over the compromises assignment. Yesterday I read the first 3 with you, and I showed you how to do the notes. Now I want to go over the last 3. Those are a little bit more complicated, and if you're having trouble with it, you can actually look at my notes or listen to my explanation in this broadcast. So let me X out of my presentation, And let me go to the compromise readings. So for the compromise readings, yesterday I read and gave you examples of notes for the first three. The Great Compromise, the Three-Fifths Compromise, and the Slave Trade Compromise. And all you had to do for the assignment was read the Commerce Compromise, the Electoral College Compromise, and the Massachusetts Compromise. So now looking at my key, let me blow this up a little bit. A little more. Okay, that's good. So I had some clever color scheming right here. I basically put each side as red and blue, and a compromise is where you meet in the middle. So red and blue meet in the middle, it's purple. This is the gist of what I had written yesterday. I did it much shorter on yesterday's version. This is just my full version. But now let's talk about Commerce Compromise. So the divide between the sides in the Commerce Compromise was you have Northern delegates versus Southern delegates. Southern delegates were all about farming. Northern delegates were all about business and manufacturing. And this is the disagreement they had. How is the country supposed to pay for all of this new stuff? How is it supposed to pay their debt that they owe to France and the Netherlands? How are they supposed to pay everything that they are trying to establish in this early country? The Northerners basically wanted to tax any goods coming into the United States. So if you're someone in Spain trying to sell products in America, they were going to tax you. That was a simple way to raise money. You tax people who are sending stuff in, not Americans here at home. But they also wanted to tax any raw materials coming out of America. So let's say you cut timber for a living for shipyards, and you cut down the trees and you send the wood across the ocean to England where they can make ships. Well, they wanted to tax you anytime you sent something out of the country. So they thought there was two easy ways to make money, a little bit on the foreigners sending stuff in and a little bit on Americans sending stuff out. Southern delegates, on the other hand, hated that second part because pretty much their entire economy was based on farming, and they would sell the raw materials like cotton and other crops they grew to Europe. And if they're being taxed at such a high rate, that's actually going to hurt business because the foreign countries are going to want to buy less if they keep getting taxed on raw materials that are going out of America to these other countries. So the compromise basically had 3 points, and I've underlined them here. They allow the tax on things coming into America. They got rid of the idea of taxing raw materials going out of America. And there were 2 extra things that were added just in case. The Constitution made sure that the federal, central, or national government would be in charge of making the rules on business and trade between states. And the second extra point was that any law that affects commerce, so commerce means trade, any law that relates to trade would need a 2/3 majority in the Senate to pass. So it was trying to make sure that anything that affected trade would have a big majority to make sure there was widespread agreement. That was the basics of the Commerce Compromise. Electoral College Compromise. So we went over the Electoral College and how it works. But what were the actual 2 sides debating at the convention? Well, here's what they were. One side wanted the president to be elected by the people through a popular vote of all voters. Very simple, like most countries do for a head of state or head of government. What did the other side want? The other side didn't want the president to be elected by the people at all. They thought the president should serve for life like a Supreme Court judge and be selected by state governments. They wanted it to be a position that was very much far away from ordinary people at the voting booth. So the compromise that came up was the Electoral College. And the main feature of it is that you have a popular vote, but instead of the popular vote going to a candidate for president, they go towards electors in each state who then have the final say by approving the people's choice or making their own choice if they don't like the people's choice. Now, today that mostly means that the popular vote is followed by the electors, but there are circumstances, as we saw, where that is not necessarily the case. That was the compromise that was made, and probably still the most controversial aspect of the Constitution. So instead of having a popular vote president and no election at all for president, you have kind of a middle ground, the Electoral College process. And finally, the Massachusetts Compromise. This one is going to be relevant, especially for next week. 2 sides in this one, Federalists and Anti-Federalists. This is what the Federalists wanted. They didn't want there to be a list of rights in the Constitution because they felt their sketch of government, which they believed the Constitution that's all needed to be, didn't need a laundry list of rights. And they were afraid that in the future there would be people out there who would interpret any list as saying, you only have the right to these things on the list and nothing else. They wanted it to be much more open, where you had a right to do pretty much anything unless it said you couldn't. Other side of the debate, anti-federalists, they felt that the Constitution didn't do enough to protect the rights and freedoms of individual people. They wanted there to be parts of the Constitution that listed the rights people kept. Having gone through the Constitution, this should sound familiar. There isn't actually a lot of stuff in it that we've read so far that deals with the rights of individual people. A lot of it is about the powers of government and certain big picture ideas. So the Massachusetts Compromise was the compromise that basically got the Constitution over the hump and ratified. And this is the agreement. The Constitution would be ratified or accepted as is, with only 7 articles. The 7 we have gone through already. We did the scavenger hunts for 1, 2, 4 to 7, and we read Article 3. Constitution is ratified just as it is, 7 articles. Then there was a kind of handshake agreement with this compromise that afterwards, only after, would there be a Bill of Rights added as amendments. And those are the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, and we're going to talk about that next week. But that was what eventually got some anti-federalists on board, enough of them to make sure that the Constitution was ratified and accepted as the law of the land, and as it has remained to this very day. So let me just scroll up again. So in case you missed some of the stuff in the compromises, you can look on the screen at some of the main points and fill in what's missing. But that is the assignment, and that is going to be due Friday morning, 8:30. So please make sure you complete it and turn it in. If you want the information on the first 3 compromises, go to yesterday's video, 006, and I read them out loud and go over the notes for those as well. Now, back to our agenda slides. Something fun to end this edition of Free LEPRE Radio. We have the memes of the day, trying to keep things fun and relaxed in this environment of isolation and quarantine. So, first meme of the day. Let's take a look. Actually, I have a great title slide for this, which I will play right now. Memes of the day. Where's my sound effect? There we go. Exciting stuff. Almost feels like we accomplished something. Maybe we did. Memes of the day. First one. Oh, we all can identify with this right now, can't we? How people studied in 2019 in chairs, in classrooms with paper and pencils, and now how people study in 2020. Although I can't say we've gone technologically far enough to have holograms at the Jedi Council. I wish that we can get to a point like that. I'd love to have a hologram of myself projected into your living room or wherever. Like Emperor Palpatine or anyone else in Star Wars. Though I can't use the Force through a hologram, or at all, still would make things a lot more interesting than they are. Second meme of the day. Oh, here we go. Med school humor right there. Not that I would understand, but in Europe right now, of course, a lot of doctors are going to be thrown into the front lines helping people who are sick. And if you're a final year med school student, desperate times call for desperate measures. You're going to get thrown right into the fight. So, all right, kid, you're a doctor now. Maybe that will be happening in the United States. Who knows? But great to have Peter Parker representing our med students. And Tony Stark representing an entire continent. And lastly, for the third meme of the day, we have a new series of children's books hitting the library shelves this summer. The Where's Waldo Social Distancing Edition. A much more simple way of playing, or the Where's Waldo books. This could probably go for the preschool age children. Not really hard to find Waldo in this. Everyone's got to stay at least 6 feet apart. So that makes finding Waldo pretty easy. Although I can't really find him in this photo or this picture of it. Maybe you can. Yeah, Where's Waldo Social Distancing Edition. Fun stuff. And that will do it for today's episode. Trying to keep them shorter for your sake here. I don't want to put you through the situation of having to listen to me for an hour, half hour. Trying to keep these around 15 minutes. And I have accomplished that goal pretty much. So thank you, and I will see you tomorrow.